Ladies and gentlemen, when you become entangled with a narcissistic person, there is something deeply disturbing you need to understand. Their desire for control can sometimes become much more extreme than simply wanting to dominate a relationship. In the darkest situations, their fixation can turn toward wanting to see you completely broken, powerless, or erased from the life you once built. What makes this frightening is that these intentions are not always obvious. They can hide behind subtle comments, strange reactions, cold expressions, and disturbing behavior that is easy to dismiss at first. In this video, Narcissist Mind will uncover the warning signs that can reveal when a narcissist is becoming dangerously consumed with your downfall. Understanding these patterns matters because recognizing them early can help you stop confusing cruelty with ordinary conflict and start taking your own emotional safety seriously. One of the earliest places this destructive mindset can appear is inside the narcissist's imagination. Before someone acts on harmful intentions, they may spend considerable time imagining scenarios where the other person suffers, loses everything, or experiences humiliation. These fantasies are not necessarily visible to anyone else, which is why they can be so difficult to recognize. You may notice only brief moments when something slips through the mask. Perhaps they seem strangely amused when something goes wrong for you, show very little concern when you are struggling, or make a joke about your pain that feels far more personal than ordinary teasing. There can be an unsettling satisfaction in their reaction to your setbacks. Instead of comforting you when you are vulnerable, they may appear energized by your weakness. Your suffering can become something they interpret as evidence that they still have influence over you. This is where the dynamic becomes especially unhealthy. For a narcissistic person, watching you lose confidence can create a temporary sense of superiority. Your pain becomes evidence that they still matter, that they can still affect your emotions, and that they have not lost their position of power. They may never openly say that they want you to suffer, but their behavior can communicate something very different. Sarcasm, threatening statements, humiliating remarks, and comments designed to make you feel dependent can reveal what their words attempt to conceal. You might hear statements suggesting that you will fail without them, that leaving them will ruin your life, or that you will eventually regret choosing yourself. Individually, these remarks might sound like arrogance or bitterness, but when they repeatedly appear alongside cruelty and manipulation, they can reveal a much deeper desire to keep you psychologically beneath them, rather than allowing you to move forward independently. There is another disturbing pattern worth recognizing. Some narcissistic individuals seem far more comfortable when you are struggling than when you are recovering. When your confidence collapses, they may appear calm or even pleased. But when you begin rebuilding your life, reconnecting with people, becoming successful, or finding happiness without them, their attitude can suddenly change. Your recovery threatens the story they have created about you. If they convinced you that you were incapable, your success disproves them. If they told you that nobody else would want you, healthy relationships challenge that belief. If they convinced you that you could never survive without them, your independence becomes undeniable evidence that they were wrong. That is why your healing can sometimes provoke hostility. Your strength reminds them that their control was never absolute. And for someone obsessed with domination, losing that control can feel unbearable. Before their behavior ever reaches the point of trying to destroy your circumstances, they may begin attacking your identity itself. This process is usually gradual, which makes it particularly difficult to recognize while you are living through it. It can begin with criticism disguised as concern. They question your decisions, challenge your intelligence, dismiss your opinions, or repeatedly suggest that you are incapable of handling life on your own. At first, you may believe they are simply trying to help you improve, but eventually, the criticism becomes so frequent that you start hearing their judgment inside your own head. You begin asking yourself whether you really are incompetent, whether your dreams are unrealistic, or whether your instincts can be trusted. This is how psychological erosion begins. The goal is not always to destroy you overnight. Sometimes it is to make you slowly abandon confidence in yourself. Once your confidence has been weakened, isolation can become the next weapon. People who care about you may suddenly become targets of criticism. Your friends may be described as selfish, toxic, jealous, or a bad influence. Your family may be portrayed as controlling, unsupportive, or secretly against you. Slowly, you may begin distancing yourself from the people who once helped you maintain perspective. The fewer outside voices you have, the easier it becomes for the narcissist's version of reality to dominate your thinking. Eventually, you may start depending on them to tell you what is true, what is wrong, what you should feel, and even who you are supposed to become. This is not genuine intimacy. It is the gradual removal of your independent identity. When another person needs you disconnected from everyone who could challenge their influence, that should be taken seriously. After weakening your relationships, they may begin attacking the parts of your life that make you feel most alive. Your hobbies can suddenly become childish or pointless. Your career can be dismissed as unimpressive. Your goals can be treated as unrealistic fantasies. Even the things that once made you proud may become targets for ridicule. Over time, you may stop pursuing the activities that bring you happiness simply because you have learned to anticipate their criticism. This is how someone can slowly dismantle your sense of individuality without ever announcing that they are doing it. They do not have to physically remove everything from your life. They only need to convince you that the things you love are embarrassing, meaningless, or impossible. Once you stop trusting your passions and stop believing in your potential, you become much easier to control. The most frightening part is that you may not recognize the transformation while it is happening. Instead of suddenly becoming a completely different person, you change through hundreds of small compromises. You stop expressing certain opinions because you know there will be an argument. You stop seeing particular friends because you are tired of defending them. You abandon hobbies because you know they will be mocked. You become quieter because speaking honestly creates conflict. Eventually, you may look at yourself and wonder where the confident person you once knew has gone. You feel emotionally exhausted, disconnected, and strangely empty. That experience can feel like being dead inside, because so many parts of your identity have been suppressed. This is why rebuilding yourself after narcissistic abuse often requires more than simply leaving the relationship. You have to reconnect with the parts of yourself that were gradually pushed into silence. Another major warning sign is an escalating obsession with control. At this stage, the issue is no longer ordinary jealousy or insecurity. The narcissist wants increasing authority over your choices, movements, relationships, and decisions. They may question who you are speaking with, where you have been, why someone contacted you, or what you discussed with another person. These questions can initially be presented as love or concern, but repeated monitoring can become a form of surveillance. They remember your routines, observe your habits, study your weaknesses, and collect information that can later be used during arguments or manipulation. The more information they possess, the easier it becomes for them to predict your reactions and exploit your vulnerabilities. Your privacy begins disappearing, while their need to know everything about you becomes increasingly intense. Control often develops through tiny restrictions that are easy to overlook individually. They might suggest that a particular outfit is inappropriate, question why you need certain friends, criticize the places you visit, or insist that their opinion should determine your decisions. Each individual incident may seem too minor to challenge, but eventually, these small demands become a system. You begin asking permission instead of making choices. You calculate their reaction before speaking. You change your behavior to avoid anger. You convince yourself that surrendering a little freedom is easier than dealing with another argument. Yet every time you give up another piece of independence, the boundary moves further. What started as a suggestion becomes an expectation, and what became an expectation eventually feels like a rule you are afraid to break. The most important thing to understand is that domination rarely becomes satisfied simply because you give in. If control is the foundation of the relationship, every concession can create a demand for another one. They may want access to your phone, knowledge of your whereabouts, influence over your friendships, authority over your appearance, or control over your choices. And when you finally begin resisting, their behavior may intensify. Your independence becomes evidence that they are losing influence. This can lead to anger, intimidation, guilt-tripping, threats, or attempts to punish you emotionally. The more clearly you establish your own boundaries, the more strongly a controlling person may attempt to push through them. That does not mean your boundaries are wrong. It means your independence is exposing the unhealthy nature of the dynamic. This is why the transition from control to hostility can feel so personal. You are not simply disagreeing with someone who has a different opinion. You may be dealing with a person who has become accustomed to having their preferences treated as commands. When you begin making decisions for yourself, they may interpret your independence as betrayal. They may twist ordinary choices into evidence that you no longer care about them, or that someone else is influencing you. They may search for weaknesses, create unnecessary conflicts, or deliberately provoke emotional reactions so they can regain the upper hand. The objective is not healthy communication. It is restoring the power imbalance they were comfortable with. That is what makes this pattern so exhausting. You are constantly forced to defend your right to make ordinary decisions about your own life. Eventually, living under this level of control can change the way you think and behave. You become hyper-aware of their moods. You analyze every message before sending it. You worry about how they will interpret harmless actions. You may even begin changing your plans before they have asked you to, because you already know what their reaction will be. That is a sign that their control has moved from the outside into your own mind. You are no longer simply responding to their demands, you are anticipating them. And that can leave you confused, isolated, and emotionally drained. Remember, recognizing these patterns does not mean assuming that every narcissistic person intends physical harm. It means taking coercive control, intimidation, threats, stalking, and escalating hostility seriously, and protecting your independence and safety when those warning signs appear. While you are struggling to hold yourself together and make sense of what is happening, a controlling, narcissistic person may already be preparing for a life where you no longer have any influence over them. Their need for control can gradually become an obsession with removing your presence from their world. For them, the issue is not simply power. It can become about possession, entitlement, and the belief that they should determine what happens to you. When that sense of ownership begins slipping away, their behavior may become increasingly hostile. One particularly damaging tactic is attacking your reputation from behind the scenes. Instead of confronting you openly, they may use gossip, selective information, exaggerated stories, or carefully manipulated versions of events. The purpose is to damage how other people perceive you, while allowing them to maintain the appearance of innocence. This is how a quiet campaign against your character can begin. Character assassination rarely starts with an outrageous accusation. More often, it begins with something small enough to sound believable. They may tell someone that they are simply worried about you, then casually mention a personal weakness or embarrassing situation. They might share only part of an argument, leaving out everything that would explain your reaction. With coworkers, they can present themselves as the patient person who has been dealing with an unreasonable individual. With family members, they may describe themselves as concerned and confused about your behavior. The details are carefully selected because a complete lie can be easier to challenge than a distorted truth. By mixing facts with omissions and exaggerations, they create a story that sounds convincing. Meanwhile, you may have no idea that this narrative is spreading until you notice people around you behaving differently. That is what makes a smear campaign so psychologically exhausting. You often experience the consequences before you understand the cause. A friend who once called you regularly becomes distant. A colleague suddenly seems uncomfortable around you. A family member begins questioning your decisions in a way they never did before. You can feel that something has changed, but you cannot immediately identify what caused it. Meanwhile, the narcissistic person may continue behaving normally in public. They may even appear compassionate and concerned about you. This creates a painful contrast between what you are experiencing privately and what everyone else sees publicly. You may begin wondering whether you are imagining the entire situation. But when these changes repeatedly occur, alongside gossip, manipulation, or deliberate misinformation, they deserve your attention. Your social environment should not become a battlefield simply because someone wants to control the story about you. A narcissistic person who relies heavily on reputation attacks does not necessarily need to confront you directly. They can use your relationships as the battlefield instead. Every connection becomes an opportunity to influence how people see you. They may subtly discourage others from trusting you, suggest that you are unstable, or imply that you are difficult to deal with. The objective is often isolation. The fewer people who understand your side, the easier it becomes to manipulate your reality. Gradually, your support system can become smaller, while their influence grows larger. You may start feeling as though nobody understands you and nobody would believe you anyway. That hopelessness can become another form of control. When you are surrounded by doubt and suspicion, you may become quieter, withdraw from people, and stop defending yourself altogether. That is why protecting healthy relationships and maintaining contact with trustworthy people can be so important. The psychological impact of this kind of campaign can be devastating. Every rumor becomes another reason to question yourself. Every strange reaction from someone else can make you wonder what was said behind your back. You may replay conversations repeatedly, searching for something you did wrong. You may start monitoring your own behavior because you fear that anything you say could be twisted later. Over time, this constant self-monitoring can make you feel like a shadow of the person you once were. Your confidence weakens, your social world becomes smaller, and your ability to trust your own judgment begins to suffer. The narcissistic person's greatest advantage is not necessarily that everyone believes them. It is that you begin believing that nobody will believe you. Once you lose confidence in your own voice, defending yourself becomes much harder. That is why clarity and grounded support matter so much. Another disturbing pattern can involve the narcissistic person's apparent enjoyment of your emotional suffering. Not every person with narcissistic traits experiences pleasure from another person's pain, and it is important not to assume that every cruel reaction represents a hidden desire for destruction. However, some highly manipulative individuals may repeatedly provoke distress and then appear satisfied when they succeed. They may deliberately push sensitive buttons, create unnecessary conflict, or make comments designed to trigger emotional reactions. When you finally become upset, They may accuse you of being unstable or overly emotional. This creates a trap where they provoke the reaction and then use that reaction as evidence against you. Your pain becomes part of the argument they constructed. Instead of addressing the behavior that caused the distress, they focus attention entirely on your response and position themselves as the calm, reasonable person. The cruelty often begins in ways that are easy to dismiss. It may be a sarcastic comment about your intelligence, a joke about something you are insecure about, or criticism disguised as helpful advice. One incident may not seem important enough to challenge, but repeated exposure changes the impact. Each comment can chip away at your confidence until you become increasingly uncertain about yourself. Eventually, you may start accepting their descriptions of you as facts. You wonder whether you really are too sensitive, too emotional, too difficult, or incapable of making good decisions. That internal confusion can become extremely powerful, because once you distrust your own judgment, you become more dependent on the person who keeps criticizing it. They may then position themselves as the only person capable of telling you what is true. This creates a cycle in which criticism produces insecurity. Insecurity produces dependence, and dependence strengthens their influence. The cycle can continue because your reactions become part of the game. They learn which subjects upset you, which situations make you anxious, and which words cause you to defend yourself. Then those vulnerabilities can be repeatedly used to provoke you. You cry, they call you dramatic. You defend yourself, they call you aggressive. You become angry after being repeatedly pushed, and suddenly your anger becomes the entire story. This allows them to avoid responsibility while keeping you emotionally occupied. A healthy person may recognize that they have hurt you and become interested in repairing the situation. A manipulative person may instead study your reaction and use it against you later. That difference matters. Your emotional response does not automatically make you the problem. Sometimes the reaction is a consequence of being repeatedly pushed beyond your limits. Understanding that can help you stop accepting blame for behavior that was deliberately provoked. What makes these dynamics especially confusing is the difference between the public image and the private reality. Outside the relationship, the narcissistic person may appear charming, generous, patient, helpful, and emotionally mature. They may be the person everyone describes as kind and dependable. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, you may experience criticism, intimidation, manipulation, and emotional punishment. This split can make you feel completely trapped, because when you try to explain what is happening, people may struggle to reconcile your experience with the person they think they know. You may even begin questioning yourself because everyone else sees a different version of them. This is one reason abusive dynamics can remain hidden for so long. The public image protects the private behavior. And when nobody understands what you are experiencing, your isolation becomes even heavier. Eventually, that confusion can make you question your own perception. You begin wondering whether you misunderstood the conversation, whether you reacted too strongly, or whether perhaps you really are responsible for everything going wrong. This is where psychological manipulation can become particularly damaging. When someone repeatedly challenges your memory, emotions, motives, and interpretation of events, you can lose confidence in your own internal compass. The more uncertain you become, the more authority you may give their version of reality. That dependence can reinforce their sense of superiority. But you should remember something important. Questioning yourself is not proof that you are wrong. Confusion can be produced by prolonged manipulation, contradictory behavior, and constant emotional pressure. Reconnecting with trustworthy people, documenting important events when appropriate, and giving yourself space to think independently can help restore your sense of reality. For some highly controlling people, the next phase can involve preparing for life without the relationship, while still attempting to control the narrative surrounding its ending. They may develop new friendships, strengthen other alliances, or begin establishing connections that provide emotional or practical alternatives. Sometimes they may appear suddenly detached, as though they have already emotionally moved on. They might become more interested in presenting themselves as successful, independent, or completely unaffected by the relationship. This can feel extremely cold, especially if they previously insisted that you were essential to their life. But this behavior does not necessarily mean they are planning your physical destruction. More often, it can reflect their desire to protect their image, secure new sources of attention, and ensure they are not left feeling powerless. Their focus may shift from controlling you directly to controlling the story everyone hears about the separation. During this phase, they may also begin rewriting the history of the relationship. Events that once happened one way are suddenly described differently. Their mistakes disappear from the story, while your reactions become the center of attention. They may present themselves as the person who endured everything and portray you as the reason the relationship failed. This can happen even when people close to them know there were serious problems behind the scenes. The goal is to leave the relationship with their reputation intact. They want to appear like the survivor, rather than the person who caused harm. This is why you may feel as though you are being erased from the story, even while you are still living through its consequences. Your experiences are minimized, their behavior is reframed, and the entire narrative is rearranged to protect their self-image. The result can be deeply disorienting if you allow their version to replace your own memory. One of the strangest moments can come when the narcissistic person suddenly becomes calm. After months or years of arguments, emotional pressure, accusations, or attempts to control you, their sudden quietness can feel unsettling. But calmness by itself does not prove that someone is planning something dangerous. Sometimes people become quiet because they have emotionally disengaged, found another source of attention, or realized that conflict is no longer producing the result they want. What matters is the behavior surrounding that silence. Are there threats, stalking, attempts to intimidate you, financial retaliation, escalating harassment, efforts to isolate you from support? Those concrete behaviors matter far more than trying to interpret someone's thoughts. If you ever feel that a situation is becoming unsafe, focus on observable warning signs and practical protection, rather than trying to predict what is inside another person's mind. The most important message is that you do not have to accept someone else's version of reality as the definition of your life. If a person repeatedly tries to control your relationships, damage your reputation, undermine your confidence, or isolate you from people who care about you, take those patterns seriously. Protect your boundaries without turning the situation into a competition. Keep trustworthy people close. Preserve important records when necessary. Be careful about what personal information you share with someone who has repeatedly misused it. Most importantly, do not allow another person's cruelty to convince you that your identity belongs to them. Their ability to influence you depends heavily on access, fear, confusion, and your belief that they have authority over your life. The moment you begin rebuilding your confidence and making decisions from a grounded place, that control can weaken. Your story does not disappear simply because someone else tries to rewrite it.